Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where in the world you are. I'm Kurt Geisinger, currently the president of Division 52, and we are here to celebrate Division 52. 25 years ago, some great leaders founded this division of international psychology within the American Psychological Association, and it has already had a great impact. As someone who personally has spent 20 years in APA governance, I can tell you that at times anyhow, APA has been surprisingly parochial. And I don't mean that in the Catholic sense. We are an organization that often looks only to our own country and sometimes even only to our own states. Now, it is very important that we look internationally, and certainly there are things going on in the world today as we speak that tell us just how important that is. And we're very pleased that in the last few weeks, the APA Board of Directors and APA have decided, for example, to suspend their drafting an MOU with the Russian Federation psychologists. And we as international psychologists, we want to be friends with psychologists all around the world, but politically we have to be aware of what's going on. Now, we've had many great leaders in Division 52 over the years. I've tried to pick some of the ones that I knew anyhow best, both to be the speakers in this series and the presenters, or the chairs of the sessions in this series. And I'm very pleased. I can actually tell you, I reached out to 12 people, 6 speakers and 6 chairs, and all said yes. And that tells us a little something about just how important 52 is to its members and the kind of impact that we think we can have. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to one of our former leaders, Nancy SIDUN, who continues to lead for us in many ways. Dr. SIDUN?
Thank you so much. It's my honor and privilege to introduce the inaugural presentation for the anniversary webinar for Division 52, honoring our 25th anniversary. I honestly can't think of a more worthy soul to launch this for us than Danny Wedding. So I want to share, well, Danny says maybe so, but I think so. I want to share a little bit about Danny. I suspect most of you know a lot about him, but in case you don't, just to kind of put it in context, what an honor it is of the person you're going to hear talk today. Danny in his bio says he retired. I think that's a very inappropriate word, really, because as you will see, he continues to be very involved in consulting, editing, writing, and very active in the field. But he retired from his full-time job at the American University of Antigua, a Caribbean medical school where he was chair of the Department of Behavioral Science and Neuroscience. And prior to being there, he was at Alliant International University with the California Schools of Professional Psychology, where he served as the Associate Dean for Management and International Programs. While he was based in San Francisco, he was responsible for the psychology training programs in Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Mexico City. I suspect you got a few miles during that time of your life. And prior to being at Alliant, for 2 decades, he was teaching for the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Medicine, where he was a professor of psychiatry and the director of the Missouri Institute of Mental Health. He also served as a faculty member at 2 other medical schools, Marshall University and East Tennessee State University. One of the things I believe he'll be sharing with us today is his Fulbright experiences, and he's been a Fulbright 2 times. The most recent, he was a Fulbright Yonsei Distinguished Scholar at Yonsei University in Seoul, Korea. And prior to that, he was a Fulbright where he spent studying Buddhism and teaching psychotherapy to psychiatry residents at the Chiang Mai University School of Medicine in Thailand. I'm sure many of you are really familiar with much of his publication. He's published a dozen books and many manuscripts, and been very active as editor. His most recent books include the 11th edition of Current Psychotherapies and the 4th edition of Movies and Mental Illness. And you get a sense of the breadth and depth of his work. He's also published a book that is used as a medical school textbook, Behavior of Medicine. And for many, many years, he served as the editor of PSYCHOLOGIST. One thing, if you know Danny and spend any time with him, you'll know he's really jazzed about his life partner, his wife, Karen. He'll freely talk to you about his partner and the things that they do together, most recently moving to Oregon, starting a new life there. He also has 2 sons that he'll gladly share how proud he is of them. I don't want to take too much time away from Danny because I think he has a lot to offer us. So I'll just conclude that it's been my privilege and honor to work closely with you in Division 52, as well as on the Committee of International Relations in Psychology with APA's committee. So let me turn it over. And one thing I should say, if you have a question, we will be tracking those. We hope to have a question and answer session at the end. I won't interrupt Danny unless it's a question just so burning it cannot possibly wait to the end. But hopefully we'll have time to answer all questions then. All right, let me turn it over.
Thank you, Nancy. You're a jewel, and we've been friends for so many years. And one of the joys of working with Division 52 is the incredible people you meet along the way. So Kurt asked me to talk about how I've been able to integrate my life as a psychologist with my interest in international psychology and my passion for travel. And I'm glad to do that. And I hope to share some things with you, perhaps that will be relevant. Much of what I do will target young psychologists who are starting their careers. I'm wrapping up mine. I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's just been a joy to be a psychologist. And I especially appreciate being an international psychologist. So this is my wife, Karen. Nancy alluded to her. We're having lunch on the balcony of a home that we shared in Aix-en-Provence. And Karen has traveled with me for this past decade, just about everywhere I've gone, and I'm grateful to have her support. One of the questions I most frequently ask is, what's a beautiful woman like that doing with a bum like you? And the answer in part ties in with international psychology, because Karen and I met online, and I was flipping through and trying to decide if I should swipe left or swipe right. And I came to Karen and thought to myself, she's far too pretty for me, not a chance. And then I noticed that she had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand, and I had done a Fulbright in Thailand. So I thought we'd have something to talk about. So I took a chance and invited her out and wrote to her in Thai. And one thing led to another, and we've been married for about 8 years now. Travel's a passion for both Karen and me. The red dots are places we've visited. The green dots are places we've lived. And unfortunately, COVID got in the way of that. It's been a real problem for all of us. And those of us in Division 52 love to travel. And so it's been a tough 2 years. I want to say what a joy it's been to be actively involved with the division these many, many years, almost from the very first days of the founding of the division. And there are extraordinary people who belong to Division 52. And Kurt alluded to this. You can see Mary Bullock in the background, and Uwe, and Mercedes, and all my friends. This is Michael Stevens, Judy Kuriansky, just incredible people. I don't know why there's an arrow pointing at Wade Pickering, but I'll figure that out someday. So my love of travel began early on. Neither one of my parents finished high school, but my dad was a soldier in the Army, and we got to live in Panama, and we got to live in Germany. And so, but we never had much money. And so I did what poor kids do who can't afford to go to college. I joined the Air Force, and they made me a medic. And so 3 of the 4 years I was in the Air Force, I was stationed in Taiwan and South Korea. I had a motorcycle, rode all over the island, became a cinephile, and quickly learned that the officers weren't smarter than I was. They'd just been to college and I hadn't. So I decided to go to college. And I was at staging hospitals, and so I was never in Vietnam, but we would take people who had been injured in the Vietnam War, and they'd be brought to our hospital to be patched up until they were well enough to get back to the States. But there was a tremendous amount of military traffic during the Vietnam War, and it was relatively easy to catch hops. And so while I was a medic in the Air Force, I got to visit Bangkok and Hong Kong and Tokyo and continue to travel. It was just a great experience. After 4 years in the Air Force, I joined the Navy Reserves. I grew a beard in graduate school and didn't want to shave it. So I switched over to the Navy as a psychologist, got a commission, and this is my son, Joshua. And I've enjoyed being in the reserves. One way to see the world is to join the military. The Navy has sent me to Naples, Italy, at a hospital there to work. They've sent me to London for one of my summer tours. I've been to Pearl Harbor, New Orleans, Pensacola, San Diego, and Bethesda. And in Bethesda, I had the honor of working for 3 months during Operation Desert Storm when I was mobilized. And I also got to train interns year after year. One of those interns was Morgan Salmons. Morgan may be on the call, I'm not sure, but he stood out in part because he was 6'6", but in part because he was very bright and capable. And so he played a prominent part in my future life. This is Salzburg. And as soon as I got out of the military and found myself in college, I signed up for a semester abroad in Salzburg. Salzburg's the home of Mozart. You might know it was a wonderful decision and a good decision. And so Harvard University had a program where they sent students over to live in the Von Trapp family estate. If you've seen The Sound of Music, you remember some of the scenes, and it was filmed on site at the Von Trapp family estate. I went to Illinois State University, and Illinois State University had a program where they trained students in the servants' quarters of the Von Trapp family estate. And I went to Illinois State and learned something about caste, and the kids from Harvard really weren't interested in us. Occasionally they would try to hit on our girls, but otherwise there was no interest. But I'd have lunch every day at this gazebo. And it's the same gazebo where Chris Plummer and Julie Andrews were seen the Corvette to dance in the Sound of Music. So it was just a wonderful experience. We had a lot of fun when we got back. That's me right there. And we all shared notes. And it was a great thing to be young. When the program was over, we had 6 weeks before we had to return to the United States. And so we all got Eurail passes. And my girlfriend and I bummed around. We didn't have much money, but we would alternate nights. And so we'd sleep on the train one night going from, say, Paris to Rome. And then the next night we'd get a cheap pension. And we found that we could buy some grapes and some bread and some wine and some cheese and have a fabulous meal and not spend much money at all. And we're still doing it. I told Kurt that I would talk about some of the failed attempts at international efforts, and there've been a bunch. I applied for a job with the Webster University program in Vienna and was one of 3 finalists, but my German wasn't good enough for me to make the cut, and I've always kind of regretted that. And also, early in my career, I was one of 3 finalists for a position at the American University of Athens, and found that pretty exciting. And it was just as the university was getting started. So they've trained almost 20,000 students since the university founded. I could have been a part of that from the very beginning, but this little boy got in the way. My wife discovered she was pregnant shortly after I applied for the job at the University of Athens, and she said she wasn't going to have her baby in Athens. But there are lots of American universities around the world. If you're interested in teaching internationally, you can explore these. You can write to the chair of psychology to see if there are openings, or you can check the Monitor, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and look for opportunities. When I was picking a college, I was a GI sitting on a bed in an open bay barracks with a bunch of catalogs scattered around me, and I didn't have any type of counseling or advising. Had I known then what I know now, I would have opted to go to Sophia University or the University of Hong Kong. Both are universities in which English is the language of instruction. And so these are 10 schools where you could go and only speak English and still manage to get a degree. Following my time at Illinois State, I applied for the Peace Corps and it was turned down, actually, but offered VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, as a consolation prize. And so got to go live in New York City and work on Rikers Island. And I saw a lot of pathology on the island and became intrigued with abnormal psychology and decided to apply to graduate programs in clinical psychology. I applied to 6 programs, 4 turned me down, and I was accepted by the University of Hawaii and the University of Vermont. Had I gone to Vermont, George Albee would have been my mentor. He was a former president of APA and one of my heroes. I decided to make my decision on a cold night when I was walking around the block. And it was cold enough that by the time I got back to my apartment, I decided to go to the University of Hawaii. And Nancy can tell you how beautiful Hawaii is and how glorious it is to live there. And the university is in Manoa, just outside of Honolulu. And it's really a very special place. This is Gartley Hall. This is where I took all of my classes with Lynn Ullman and Roland Tharp and Tony Marcella and a number of other prominent psychologists who were leaders in the behavior therapy field. So one bit of advice for young psychologists, and especially for graduate students, is to find a mentor. And for me, my mentor at Hawaii, at least one of the most important ones, was Ray Corsini. And he had an adjunct appointment. He was a prominent Adlerian psychologist and one of the best writers I have ever encountered. And so I think when Ray died, he had 20 or 21 books. And I wrote his obituary for the American Psychologist. He was a remarkable man. He had this very successful book called Current Psychotherapies, and he wanted a reader for it. So he came to Scott McDonald, who was my major professor, and he said, I've got a project for the summer. I need a graduate student to help me out. I pay well. I want you to send me your very smartest graduate student and have that person work with me for the summer. And it turned out that she had plans. So they went to the second person on the list and he had plans. And they started working their way down and they finally got to me. And I was the only person who hadn't made plans for the summer. So I signed on to work with Ray, and we went out on his yacht. We'd meet in the mornings at the University of Hawaii Library. I would bring a sack full of nickels. We would make photocopies of case studies and then go out in Honolulu Harbor on Ray's boat, on his yacht. And we'd read a case and then drink a beer and then eat a sandwich and then talk about the case and then swim for a while. And it was a glorious way to spend the summer. And at the end of the summer, I got $2,000, which in 1976 was big money. So Ray and I did a book called Great Cases in Psychotherapy. He made me the senior editor, and eventually that Ray brought me on as his literary heir for the book Current Psychotherapies. And we worked on that book together for about 30 years. And it's been translated into about 20 languages. This is the Lithuanian translation, which I think has an especially attractive cover. So the book helped send my kids to graduate school. We're grateful for that. Cengage estimates that the book has been used by more than 1 million students, if you count used book sales. And the first edition came out in 1960, so it's got a 62-year history. One reviewer called it venerable, and I've had 2 good experiences with the book. One was at a conference in Cambridge, and my kids and my wife and I got to Cambridge, got to Boston a day before the conference and had some time to kill. We decided to go to Harvard. It started to rain. We ducked into the co-op bookstore and gravitated back to the psychology section. And they use current psychotherapies at Harvard. And so my kids, who were teenagers at the time, were very impressed and decided that if they used their dad's book at Harvard, he must be smart. And it lasted for about 24 hours. And then they went back to deciding I was the dumbest person on the planet. Another good experience happened in very similar circumstances when it started to rain in Ho Chi Minh City. I was with both of my sons. We ducked into a bookstore and discovered in the English language section a copy of Current Psychotherapies. So I've loved bookstores all my life. And whenever I'm in a new city, I always go into the bookstore and browse. And oftentimes they have an English language section, and I like to see who's represented there. The book allowed me to make friends with some very eminent psychologists and psychiatrists who contributed chapters in the book. Tim Beck died recently at the age of 100. Albert Ellis became a very good friend. And of course, he's been dead for some years now, but both are very eminent people. And I welcome the opportunity to work with the 2 of them before they died. Another opportunity came along when my dean asked me to apply for the Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellowship Program. And it involves working with the American Political Science Association to train students and working with the National Academy of Medicine to train students to get them ready to go work in the Congress. There are some other options that are open, but most fellows opt to go to the Congress. And so we had about a 3-month orientation with the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine. And then I went to work for Tom Daschle in the Senate. Pat DeLeon was my mentor, and I loved working on the Hill. It was a great experience, and had a fair number of international visitors come through. And DC, of course, is a very cosmopolitan city. I got Potomac fever, applied for an APA congressional fellowship. Pat supported that too. And one of the highlights of the year in the House was going to Ottawa and spending a week learning about Canadian healthcare and Canadian politics. And then parliamentary interns came to DC to learn about US politics, and that was a great experience. Because of my time in the House, sometimes later, a speaking opportunity came up in Australia, and Steve Nelson was working for AAAS, and the Australian Academy of Science contacted us and contacted AAAS and asked to send over 4 consultants. And because I'd worked in both the Senate and the House, I was picked to be the health policy consultant. And so it was an all expense paid trip to Australia. We were sponsored by FAST, FASTS, the Federation of Australian Science and Technology Societies. I got to testify before Parliament in Canberra and talk about what it had meant to me to be an intern. So that was the first of several trips to Australia. It was my honor to edit Psych Critiques for 14 years. And as editor, I sought to bring in international perspectives and had to make decisions about what books to review. And I tried to read books that were relevant to international psychology. This is a review by my friend and former professor, Tony Marcella. This is a true story, but no one ever believes it. One way to learn about other countries is to interact with students and residents and interns and fellows from those countries. And so Huntington State Hospital, they had some international residents, psychiatry residents, and one of those was a German resident named Hans Sechsauer. And his mom became sick, his dad called and didn't speak very good English, but he got the receptionist and said, pardon me, have you a Sechsauer there? And the receptionist replied, Jesus, honey, we don't even have coffee breaks. So, true story. During the time I was at Missouri, I got to work with Arshad Hussein, one of my heroes, a devout Muslim, a remarkable man, a good psychiatrist, and he had programs around the world. He's trained almost 7,000 people now to deal with disaster relief, and Arshad realizes that no country is ever going to have sufficient mental health infrastructure to deal with disasters, floods and tsunamis and hurricanes and earthquakes and that kind of thing. So what Dr. Hussein does is he takes a team of people over every few months to one country or another, and the team spends time training school teachers, most often school teachers and others, in how to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I was able to go with Arshad. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and help train teachers about post-traumatic stress disorder. And we gave lectures in Islamabad and Karachi. Kurt wanted me to talk about the Fulbright program. I'm happy to do so. It has been a major part of my life, a very important part of my life, and I cherish my Fulbright experiences. The first Fulbright I did was in Thailand. Actually, I'd applied for the University of Thessalonica about 5 years earlier, and I was a finalist, but wasn't selected at the end of the day for the program. So I've always been disappointed by that. But I did wind up going to Thailand. I made a contact, Sambat Tampanya, and Sambat was able to work with the dean of Chiang Mai University to get a strong letter of invitation. And I think that's why I was more successful with application number 2 than application number 1. If you haven't been to Thailand, you must go there. It is an amazing country, a very beautiful country. I lectured at every medical school in Thailand and many universities in the Department of Psychology. So the Fulbright program is very generous in their support of Fulbright scholars. So they will also cover your funding to surrounding countries in the region if you get an invitation. And so I was given invitations from the University of Newcastle, just north of Sydney, and in New Zealand on the South Island from the University of Otago in Dunedin. So I got to lecture both of those at both universities during my Fulbright year. And my not so hidden agenda when I went to Thailand was to learn about Buddhism. And it's one of the best places in the world to study Buddhism. At Wat Umong, I had a teacher, Mahachanya, who taught me a lot about meditation, a lot about Buddhism, and he had a PhD in political science, and I think he welcomed opportunities to practice his English. This is Sambat, the psychologist, who was my host during the Fulbright year, and he facilitated my coming over. These are 2 psychiatrists, Tien and Noi, that I work with. They've become cherished friends. Most medical school textbooks in Thailand are in English, and all of my students in the medical school and almost all of them in the psychology department were fluent in English and had no trouble following lectures. We had a Dutch nun who attempted suicide. I was able to work with her clinically but because of language difficulties, by and large, didn't do a lot of clinical work. But I did have brilliant colleagues, and we continued to publish. Interestingly, this is I've got a very minor role on this study, but it's quickly becoming my most cited publication. And published a lot with my Thai friends in a lot of different places. They're consummate scholars, and I will always be grateful for the opportunity to work with them. This is our most recent study looking at the 5 precepts in Buddhism and meditation and the way that those affect attachment and resilience. Justin is a student there getting a master's degree in the International Masters in Mental Health program. And it was my joy to help set that program up. One of the things I did a lot was lecture about movies. Everywhere I go in the world, I've given talks about films, and this is pretty easy because of 2 springboards I have. So Ryan Nemec and I wrote a book called Movies and Mental Illness. I'm working on the 5th edition of that now, and that ties into the DSM-5 now. And then Character Strengths and Virtues, Peterson and Seligman's book was the basis for our book, Positive Psychology at the Movies. And the nice thing about writing about movies is that people around the world watch US films. And if a movie like A Beautiful Mind comes out, you can find psychology students who are eager to talk to you and ask if you think that the movie is accurate. So I encourage my friends to watch films before they go abroad to lecture. So I'm continuing to write about movies. It's been a big part of my life. This is grand rounds I gave in Chiang Mai, and I appreciate Tien and Noi and Sambat for helping set that up. And the Fulbright program takes former Fulbright scholars and offers them an opportunity to sign up for something called the Fulbright Specialist Program. So after being a scholar, I went back and signed up for the specialist program and was able to go back for 6 weeks to Chiang Mai and help them develop this program. And I'm very proud of it, and I know my colleagues are as well. The second Fulbright was in Seoul, Korea. Another remarkable experience. I spent a year at Yonsei University, and it was just an incredible year. I lived right downtown, just a few blocks from City Hall, and every night I would go out and have these fantastic meals and just walk around town. It's got endless charm. My son was with me, and he and I were, he was teaching English, and so we would get together. He didn't have much money, so I bought him dinner a lot and cherished that time. And then my younger son came to visit, and Josh and Jeremy and I all got to bum around Bangkok, Hong Kong, and Ho Chi Minh City. The first time I saw a fly in a urinal was in Taipei. And it turns out that there's a problem in restrooms, commercial restrooms, where people get drunk and they pee on the floor. And it was discovered, I think, first in Amsterdam, that if you put a fly in a strategic place, drunks will try very, very hard to douse the fly. And it improves their aim by about 80%. And so Richard Thaler, who got the Nobel Prize in economics, gives this as an example of his favorite nudge. These are some of my students. We had a great time. I cherished being their professor. It was a little bit awkward because these students nominated me for Professor of the Year in the Arts and Sciences department, and I got the award. And I think some of my Korean colleagues resented the fact it came with an $800 honorarium in won, and I've always felt a little bit guilty about that. Another thing I've wondered about, I had a student in Seoul who was a pilot for Asiana Airlines, and he flew to Angkor twice a week. And he arranged for me to fly out with him. I had to pay for my ticket, but he put me up in Asiana housing and arranged for some excellent meals. And I got to visit Angkor Wat, a remarkable place. I'd been to Cambodia, but only Phnom Penh. I hadn't been to Angkor Wat, and I'm so glad I got to go. Years ago, I was in Cape Town, and I heard Desmond Tutu give the opening address for the International Congress of Psychology. And in that address, he said the three most beautiful cities in the world were Cape Town, Sydney, Australia, and San Francisco. I had loved San Francisco from the time that I was a young man and living and working in Monterey, and would come up on the weekends and try to pick up girls. We never succeeded, but God knows we tried. And Morgan, the tall intern from Bethesda, had been trying to get me to come work for him. He was the dean of the California School of Professional Psychology. He'd called a couple times, and I really wasn't interested in leaving Missouri. I had a sinecure, but the third call from Morgan came the day after the Missouri governor had cut my budget by about $200,000. And I had always loved San Francisco. I had the option of being based in San Francisco, LA, or San Diego. And I took San Francisco, a city I love, and used to live right there for 4 glorious years. So I'm proud of our work at CSPP. There are 3 international campuses, programs, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Mexico City, and then a number of immersion programs. And it was my honor to be involved in all of those. So we had lots of other programs as well, and partnerships with other universities around the world. And it was just a great experience. Here's Reiko True, who was on our faculty, a noted Japanese American scholar. This is our students celebrating the graduation, Morgan giving a commencement address, and me saying a few words to our students. And I think that there are legitimate questions you can ask about whether or not it's appropriate to take a US model of higher education and try to export it to other countries, and especially developing countries. But we don't have time to talk about that now. This is Jason Platt, who ran the Mexico City program for us, and he did an outstanding job. And I used to love my trips to Mexico, and I couldn't teach in Hong Kong. I couldn't teach in Tokyo, rather, because I didn't speak Japanese, but I was able to teach courses in abnormal psychology and psychopathology in both Mexico City and Hong Kong a number of times. It was a terrific experience. The campus was located in the Zona Rosa, one of the most interesting parts of Mexico City. And now we're in Hong Kong. This is the staff working there, great people. There were a number of international programs that were run in conjunction with City University of Hong Kong, and our PSYD program was one of those. And we're very proud of setting up a PSYD program based on the Alliant model in Hong Kong. And these are all my buddies, Diane Zellman. I really cherish the opportunity to work with Alex Long and Chris Torrey, and many of the people who I worked with have remained cherished friends. My students sent me masks when COVID first broke out, worried about the fact that they'd read we didn't have good access to them in the United States. Graduation day, it was great. We also had ties with other universities like the University of Gondar in Ethiopia. We talked about setting up a joint program there. It never came to fruition, but I enjoyed being part of that discussion. When I was president of Division 12, the Division of Clinical Psychology, I made clinical psychology around the world my presidential theme, and learned a lot about the practice of clinical psychology in other countries. This is the Hong Kong skyline at night. It's really an extraordinary place. and a place that I've lived and loved since I was 18 years old. One thing that happens is that if you look for them, and especially if you've done some writing, speaking gigs open up. This is a talk I was giving at the National University of Taiwan. This was a talk that I gave at the International Review of Bipolar Disorders. And I got a call from somebody who had read Movies and Mental Illness, and they asked if I would put together a 30-minute presentation on the way that bipolar disorder is portrayed in films. And all my expenses were covered. I got to go over to Nice, and there was some serendipity involved in that Cannes is only a short distance from Nice, and the Cannes Film Festival was going on. And so after giving my talk in Nice, I was able to go to Cannes and talk my way into participating in the Cannes Film Festival. And then this is South Africa, and that was an invited address. I think I paid my own expenses, but it was still an honor to present. This book has been a big part of my life. I'm currently working with Mary Bullock and Amanda Clinton, who are going to take over from Michael Stevens and me, and the four of us hope to do a second edition of this book in the near future. Amanda and Mary are the best possible people to write with us. I want to talk about the importance of international congresses, and the International Congress of Psychology is held every 4 years. It's an extraordinary opportunity. I've been to 4 of these. Always welcome the opportunity, and love being there. Here I am with James Bray, a former president, and Judy Kuriansky. This is one of my postdocs who did a year with me, and then went back to the University of Tehran, and subsequently invited me over to lecture at an international conference on religion, and I was the token Buddhist in the group. And we got lots of foot massage while we were there. And one of the fun things about a conference is you get to hang out with remarkable people. And so Diane Halpern is a former president, and I was sitting next to Diane, and she and I had noticed the fact that the program, which was printed and passed out at the conference, was full of typographical errors. And Shiva and I were going to a presentation on self-genital mutilation, which is a serious psychiatric problem. And yet the typesetter had dropped the S, and so it read ELF genital mutilation. And Diane leaned over and remarked, I didn't even think the little bastards had genitals. And so I loved hanging out with her during the conference. And these are just extraordinary people. You can see Nancy up here in her white shirt, and here's Amanda Clinton and Fred B. Mack and Gonzalo. And we were at a SERP meeting, and here are our 2 stalwart members of the Office of International Affairs. Mary Bullock ran it for many, many years, got the Ray Fowler Award for her work, and Amanda Clinton has taken over. This is sort of a sad picture. Nancy's there. And we were lobbying on this day, and Jean Lao Chin was with us, and Jean died from COVID, as you probably know, a few years ago. Had a remarkable experience attending the IAAP conference in Athens a few years ago. And these are set up in such a way that every 2 years there's an international conference. So there'll be an IAAP conference, then 2 years later, an International Congress of Psychology, and then 2 years later, another IAAP conference. This is the only one I've been to, but it was remarkable. Judy Kuriansky was there with me. I think Judy's on the call. We went out, and she introduced me to her college roommate. And I still have vivid memories of sharing a carafe of wine with Tom Oakland, a very prominent school psychologist who was at the meeting. Tom was actually murdered a few years ago, and it was very tragic. He was a good friend. So Judy was there, and Charlie Spielberger was there, and Ray Fowler and his wife Sandy were there. and you go to an international conference and you hang out with very, very prominent people. This was the SIP conference in 2007. It was held in Mexico City. One of my memories of SIP is that Albert Bandura was there, and he and I had a beer and spent about half an hour just chatting about psychology. And I could never have gotten Dr. Bandura's attention for a half hour at a APA conference, but I was able to without difficulty at the SIP conference. And I did something with the help of my friend Juan Jose Sanchez Souza. The conference was being held at the Holiday Inn, and I didn't want to just go to the Holiday Inn. It seemed like it'd be very much like a Holiday Inn anywhere in the world. So I wrote to Juan Jose and asked if he had a graduate student who might need a little extra money. And my plan was to pay him or her what I'd normally pay at the Holiday Inn. And so he set me up with one of his doctoral students who was wonderful. She and her friends took me around and showed me all of Mexico City and all the highlights. And I got to sit in a dissertation committee and had some great food. And it was the 100th anniversary of the birth of Frida Kahlo. And so got to see one of her exhibits. My son has lived in Colombia and in Chile for the past 10 years, and he married a Chilean woman. And so she just got her green card. They're coming back to the States, and I hope to see them tomorrow night. So, but whenever Karen and I go down to visit my son in Santiago, we always tack on another trip. We went to Peru and Argentina and other places. So this has been a big part of my life, a series that I edit for Division 12 and Hogefa. And almost all the books in the series are translated into one or more languages: Danish, Greek, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese. And I'm pleased to have a number of the books translated into Ukraine. This is the Spanish and the Korean translation. I've published and I continue to publish with my Korean colleagues as well as my Thai colleagues. This is a psychologist who asked me to autograph her copy, her translation of current psychotherapies. Had a situation a few years ago where I got to give a keynote address at Mungji University, and one of my colleagues had been best man in the wedding of the person who subsequently became the president of Mungji University, and so he invited Dong Cho to give a talk, and Dong Cho said, "Can my boss come along?" And they said yes. So that was a great experience. Went to Pol Pot, went to the killing fields in Cambodia and got to visit them. It was very sobering. Most of the intellectuals and all of the psychologists in Pol Pot's regime were slaughtered or committed suicide in anticipation of being thrown off their building. Running out of time, went to the American University of the Caribbean, had a lovely home with a pool and a view of the ocean, and had to give lectures to hundreds of students, to big crowds. But it was a remarkable experience. We were there 3 years. I got to play Santa Claus every year for kids from Antigua. Fred Leong and Guillermo Bernal and some of my other psychology friends came out to visit. And I've maintained about a 30-year history of consulting with the American University of the Caribbean in St. Martin. You might know that St. Martin is half Dutch and half French. And I got to meet some remarkable people. Jerry Chaffon, who I think is on the call, was there with me after Hurricane Irma. He is an expert on coping with disasters and trauma and disaster relief. And so he and I have both gone back to St. Martin, often to help out the school and help out the students. Something Karen and I do on a fairly regular basis is to do home exchange. and we swap our home for the homes of other people we respect and trust. It costs about $150 a year to participate, but we've been to Rome and Aix-en-Provence and Maine and San Diego, and we've had some great experiences. A few years ago, I got to go to the University of Liverpool with James Bray, and we were consulting about a clinical psychology program they were setting up, and we visited the Caravan Club in Liverpool where the Beatles started. You should know about these two journals. This is the Division 52 journal, International Perspectives in Psychology. Hografa has just taken it over, and I think they're doing a fine job with it. So we're continuing to work on the second edition of our book. This was the original advisory board. Florence Denmark was terrific and helped us recruit some very eminent people for the conference. You learn some things with international psychology. You learn that we're all more alike than different, that standards of beauty tend to be fairly universal. Everybody thinks the Taj Mahal is beautiful. You learn that people around the world love their children, and there are a lot of different approaches to health. So one of my favorite trips was to India, and I bummed around a lot after I gave my talk at the conference. And I went to Sarnath, where Buddha preached his first sermon, and I went to Varanasi, which is considered the holiest city in India. And let me conclude with a couple of remarkable experiences I've had. And in Varanasi, there were a number of sadhus, some of whom were totally naked, just wandering the streets, but many of whom wore these brilliant cloaks of various colors. And I was struck by it. And so I wanted a photograph to take home with me. So I went up and asked one of the sadhus if I could take his photo. And he was probably thinking about God or meditating or doing something profound. And some damn tourist asked to take his photograph. But he said, yes, I could. But notice his expression, look at his eyes. He was somewhat disgruntled, somewhat annoyed. And so I took his photograph, and I'd taken hundreds of photographs on that trip, and I hadn't changed any of my settings. And I looked down at the back of my camera, and it was in black and white. And he was wearing a brilliant red robe. And so I said, I'm sorry, there's something wrong with my camera. And he smiled and said, I know, do it again. And so I stood at the same place. I held the camera up. Nothing changed. I didn't change any settings. I took the photo again and got that. And so I said, it's working fine now. And he smiled again and said, I know. And he walked away. And so I keep these two photographs over my desk to remind myself that there's more than to heaven and earth than is dreamt of in my philosophy. The world has mystery in it, and I want to understand that mystery. So I'm going to wrap this up, and if people have time to ask questions, I'd be happy to answer them or be useful in any way I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. There are a few questions that have come in, and I can surely read them to you and give you an opportunity to respond to those. The first one is from your dear friend, Judy. Danny, you've accomplished so much, seen, taught, and learned so much, fulfilling many of your dreams. So in this next phase of your life, what is on your bucket list?
A lot depends on COVID. And we were passionate about travel and would make 2 or 3 international trips a year, oftentimes in conjunction with psychology conferences. It looks like the worst of COVID may be past us. I may be whistling in the graveyard, but assuming that COVID doesn't preclude it, Karen and I want to continue to travel. We want to go visit friends in Great Britain. I want to go back to international conferences again. The Prague conference, the International Congress of Psychology, was held, but it was a virtual conference, and I really cherish those opportunities to meet with people like Judy. We had so much fun when we were in Beijing, and Judy comes to all of these just as I do, and we went out with Ray Fowler and James Bray and with Sandy one time, and we all had foot massages, and that was just a glorious experience. I've got really fond memories of Beijing. So we're not going to stop traveling. And if COVID will let us, we have grandchildren now. And so that will result in us spending more time with domestic travel and perhaps a little less with international travel. But I want to spend the rest of my life going to conferences and seeing friends like you, Nancy. And so I'm sure you'll be at a lot of these meetings I go to, and it gives us a chance to catch up.
Absolutely. The next question comes from Mary, and that is, Danny, you've told us of a rewarding, expansive, and insightful life that is amazingly broad and successful. But you recalled many times when your first foray wasn't successful and you simply persisted seemingly without pause. Can you speak a little to what is behind your ability to turn a no into a path forward?
That's interesting. I guess tenacity has always been one of my virtues, and I haven't been smart enough to take no for an answer. So when I was turned down for my first Fulbright, I waited for a couple of years and licked my wounds and was sorely disappointed, but had established a relationship with Sambat Tampanya in Chiang Mai, and I wrote to him and said, is there any chance that I could come and teach at your university? And Sambat said, yes, we'd be delighted to have you. And so he greased the skids. He arranged to get a letter of invitation from the dean of the medical school. And I think that was critical in my selection, is having that type of strong support. And I didn't have anything like that when I applied at Thessalonica. And when I applied to graduate programs, it was just intensely competitive, as it still is. And I remember being disappointed by the 4 schools that turned me down, but delighted that Vermont, George Albee, and Hawaii, Leonard Ullman, both offered me fellowships. And so I've been grateful for that. And years ago, the University of Florida asked me to consider chairing their clinical psychology program. And I had to point out that Florida was one of those programs that applied to and been rejected. So I wasn't sure, having been turned down as a student, that I was the appropriate person to be the chair. So.
Fair enough. We do have one more question, but I just want to underscore what you said about kind of reaching out to contacts. That's how I ended up in Samoa.
Yeah.
And it really does make a difference. But the next question is from Kurt, basically saying that he thinks there's probably a lot of jealous people in the audience and that it's been a great talk. But if you were to recommend 3 places in the world where you have been that you believe others should visit, what are they?
Wow, gee, that's tough. I've got a list of about 20. But Thailand, certainly. I think Thailand is such an amazing country, and to a lesser extent, Cambodia and Vietnam and Southeast Asia. They've always been really special places in my heart, and I fell in love with Thailand when I was 18 years old. My time in Salzburg was very, very different, but I cherish it. And the 3 years we spent in Antigua were glorious. All of the Caribbean islands are pretty much the same, but there are about 20 different medical schools, U.S. medical schools scattered throughout the Caribbean islands. And it's surprisingly easy to find positions for psychologists. And usually when psychologists think about looking for a job, they don't consider the Caribbean. And yet it really is a remarkable opportunity. And the Chicago School has a vibrant international program. But to answer Kurt's question, sort of Thailand, the Caribbean, and Salzburg would be the 3 that come immediately to mind.
Okay. I am aware we're literally 1 minute left. I don't see any other questions that have popped up. There's been many things. I hope that we can save the chat room, because there's a lot of comments to you, Danny, about your presentation. I don't have that skill base, but can I ask Luca, can you do that? Save the chat?
Yes, of course I can.
Excellent. So Danny can see. many comments of people thanking you for an inspirational and wonderful presentation today. I'm excited for everybody that had opportunity to hear about you.
Well, I hope that some of the people listening, I hope they're younger psychologists who will accept the fact that you really can have a fairly robust and interesting life as an international psychologist. And I have loved being active in Division 52, and I've loved being a psychologist. Every minute of my career has pretty much been joyous, and I'm very grateful. So I hope people listening in have as much fun with their careers as I've had with mine.
We did get one more quick question, if we have time to answer it real fast, if you'd
Sure.
be willing to. It's from Chanel. Some college administrators value national reputation more than an international reputation. How can we help them understand the importance of international work and the fact that international reputation is as valuable?
Wow. I had the good fortune to have a guy called Brady Deaton as my provost at the University of Missouri. And Brady had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand, and he spoke fluent Thai. And so he really believed that things like the Fulbright program enhanced the reputation of the university. And so he was eager to have me involved with Fulbrights and things like that, and always supported it. And Fulbrights are a bit more rare in medical schools, but I pushed for it, and I had a dean who was a thoracic surgeon, but also a very good friend. And he agreed. He thought it enhanced the university's reputation. And so I've had the good fortune to be in places where that type of international exchange was valued, appreciated, and rewarded.
Great. All right. I thank everybody for being here, and we'll stop for now. Especially thank you, Danny, for sharing your experiences.
It's been fun. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye now.